What is the OTUS Project?
All right, so OTUS stands for Observations of Tornadoes by UAV Systems. And the goal of this project is to gather a lot of different kinds of data that have never been able to be gathered before in order to make new discoveries about tornadoes, to help work with scientists to understand why tornadoes strengthen and why they suddenly weaken. And then we're also trying to figure out winds near the surface to really help engineers build better housing through improving the building codes throughout the US.
Now, first thought of this is you guys are flying basically what is a drone into a tornado. How do you not lose the drone when it's flying through the funnel?
Right. So I guess to back up a little bit. So I have a drone racing background and I was a competitive pilot for about 5 years. And going into my senior year of college, I was talking a little bit with my brother who studied meteorology in his undergrad. And we kind of got the conversation going where he was talking about, the need to have this kind of data. And then was talking to me and was like, hey, maybe everything that you know about drones and, being at the forefront of technology, maybe that's something that could be integrated to help find this kind of data. And so I pretty much helped pull together a team with one of my friends in the field, my brother and I, and then a storm chaser. And then we kind of formed this team where we build highly specialized, custom-made, high-powered drones to be able to actually go out there and fly in these high variable winds.
Now, obviously, we're talking, tornadoes are going to put down winds anywhere from 50 to 250, maybe even 300 miles an hour. What is the strongest tornado you've been able to put a drone into and have it survive?
So the strongest tornado to date that we've flown in has been EF3, and we've actually flown into two EF3s. I actually may need to fact check myself on this, but Crowder, Missouri, which was about 2, 3 weeks ago, that was an EF3 that was confirmed, and the drone that we flew into that tornado did top out at a little over 220 miles an hour when it made an intercept. So we could definitely fly at pretty high speeds. In terms of straight line top end speed, our drone's not usually going much faster than maybe 150 miles an hour. But in terms of actually being able to handle itself in winds, that's really what matters, right? Like we're really just trying to get the data. Even if it's fighting the winds and it's being overpowered, as long as it's stable and able to get valuable data, that's all we really care about.
So just I'm envisioning kind of what the hurricane hunters do in their flight past what you guys are doing when you're flying through the funnel and you're flying at that low elevation. Are you just trying to just like punch the core, come out the other side, and then loop around and do the exact same thing?
Right. So in concept, and it's really been evolving over time because this is fairly new. We had our first intercept last year. We only were able to fly a drone inside of one tornado, and that was really just to prove the concept. And so now this year, we're trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way to sample a tornado? What's actually helpful and valuable in gathering certain kinds of data? And, if a drone's moving around in different on a three-dimensional axis and it's getting pushed around by the winds, like there's just so many variables to control. So one thing that we've thought about has been bisecting to where we just fly as fast as we can and we just try to bisect through a tornado, hopefully near the ground. It really just depends on the intercept itself. But our goal is to bisect near the ground in order to get more of like a straight line, data set. But also, we've been experimenting with just doing circles around the tornado because that's also really helpful when gathering thermo data and relative humidity to understand what's actually feeding the tornado. So we're going to do all different kinds of flights. And as we get more intercepts, we're going to figure out what's the best way to fly around a tornado.
Let me ask you about the thermo thing, because I think that's really important, especially we know you need that warm, moist air to help kind of feed the tornado. Have you guys seen anything that's really kind of popped up on the initial data set when you've been making these flights these years?
Yeah, definitely. So after the Arnett day, which was a pretty big day this year, we went back and again, we haven't fully, dissected the data and really kind of had it fully processed. But when we initially looked at the data, as we were doing circles around the tornado, we clearly saw temperature fluctuations that were going up and down depending on where we were relative to the tornado, which is really interesting. We could see the kind of like this almost like a sine wave as we were kind of orbiting the tornado. Signaling that yes, there was more of that warm, moist, sticky air that was helping get the tornado going. And then there was obviously the cool air on the other side. So still a lot to look at. And right now we're working with Joshua Horman and Karen Kasiba to really kind of figure out how to actually interpret this data and have it be useful.
That's super fascinating. Talk to me real quick about wind speeds. Same thing where you guys have kind of seen, obviously, you're going to see a ramp up as you're in the actual funnel, but what are you seeing on the periphery of the actual tornado?
Right. So when measuring winds on a drone is actually extremely difficult. And to the degree that we're doing it, it's never been done before. A lot of a lot of the ways that people are currently measuring wind using drones, they're using anemometers and they're sometimes using pitot tubes, but generally anemometers have been the standard for drones. And we actually went to a conference out in Tulsa about 6 months ago, and and we were trying to figure out, what is the best way to measure winds on a drone. Turns out it's been a lot of development. We're currently working with NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and we're currently developing a 3D wind sensing probe. But for the deployments that we were doing for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we were using more of an experimental probe head that will be used on that eventual 3D wind sensing probe. But we're really just trying to get that calibrated. And we actually just heard from NIST about a week ago where they have fully calibrated that probe that we were using. So we're going to try to kind of go back and see if we can really interpret that data that we got, and see if we can get any valuable wind speeds. But right now, it's really in the experimental phase. Again, we're not funded by NSF. We don't have any public money. It's been quite hard to get this year. And so we've really just been trying to do this all on our own dime, and just try to, have experimental probes on our drones that can be used. So for that reason, I can't, give any data or any numbers for wind speeds, but we're hopefully going to be trying to get that pretty soon.
A lot of the video that you guys have posted on your socials, YouTube especially, have gotten a lot of views. People are very fascinated. This is really the first time we're kind of seeing that 3D view of a tornado and one really that up close and that, high off of the ground. Even though you guys are doing low elevation, it's still relatively high in terms of what we're seeing. Just talk about what you're seeing behind the goggles when you're flying. Does it kind of strike you funny that you're flying a relatively expensive drone into something that could easily toss it?
Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable to fly first person. Like you said, we're flying with video goggles, and it's like that we are the drone. It's like that we are actually flying out to the tornado and circling it and going inside. So it's kind of a scary experience, especially to people who have been doing it for the first time. And I just remember last year getting really close to a tornado. It was called the Carbon tornado. And I was like, man, like I really want to turn back right now. Like this is not something that you usually want to go towards. But yeah, it's really an unreal experience. And I mean, it's just about, discovery. And I remember flying into that RNet tornado that a lot of people have seen and just like looking down and seeing kind of like the eye of the tornado as it was kind of uncondensating. I mean, it's just something that no one's ever seen before. And to me, it was really incredible. But to even show that to people in the field of meteorology and people who have been studying this their whole lives, because I don't really have that background, just having them see that, they were like, wow, this is incredible. We could even just use the video alone to make new discoveries and to help verify models and whatnot. We've been talking to scientists and people that have been modeling tornadoes, but they didn't really know if their models were completely correct. But then they saw our video and they're like, oh, this is kind of verifying, things that we've already been simulating. So really cool stuff.
Yeah, when I saw the video looking, from kind of the top-down view and to see not only just, the multi-vortices, but also seeing that, what we have theorized and kind of, only a handful of people maybe have seen in real life, which is that low pressure center where they say basically you know, it's windy on the outside of the cone, but in the center it seems to be somewhat calm, especially as you kind of get up a little bit off the ground, which, was pretty fascinating. Talk to me about your team. Obviously, you have storm chasers, you, your brother, and one other person. But what is your overall goal? What's your mission? And then how long do you guys want to continue to run the OTUS project?
So this started out as a passion project and just a really fun challenge for us. I have a pretty successful drone racing background, and so coming from kind of the top of that world, connecting with one of my friends who was also at the top of that world, joining together with a very uh, highly acclaimed storm chaser, Eric Fox. He's been chasing for decades, working with my brother who knows every single thing about tornadoes. Like we're trying to form like the most elite team possible to be able to do something this challenging. And last year was just to prove that this could work and that it could happen. We we had a good idea that it was very possible, but storm chasing's tough. I mean, there's many times where you're chasing, and even for this last week, as of the last 10 days, we've been chasing a lot, and there just haven't been setups. There haven't been tornadoes to really sample. So it's just a very variable and hard thing to do. And we were able to prove the concept last year. This year is more about going big and actually being able to get attention and get funding from NSF and maybe from the government to help us with this research because we know that this data is valuable and it is, going to help people at the end of the day. And, for next year, it's about hopefully securing that funding and actually using that to gather scientifically accurate data that's useful, right? Because people can throw probes in front of tornadoes and they can kind of measure pressure drops and whatnot. But if you're not actually getting data that's actually going to be used, um, you know, that's all we really care about, right? So we're really going to try to do that next year. That's why that we threw on that experimental 3D wind probe, and we're going to keep working with NIST and with scientists in the field to help better understand, what is actually going to be useful and how can we use this technology to better humanity.
Talk to me about chase days. Obviously, we know that it's going to be hit and miss. How do you guys decide to deploy in a storm? Do you have to wait till you see a funnel forming, or kind of just walk me through your guys' process?
Sure. So in terms of, getting there, I probably know the least about it on the team, but it is like a whole art to be able to read the models, to, read a million different charts and soundings and to try to figure out, okay, where's our target area going to be? What time do we think storms are going to fire? So we'll have times where we're driving all day long, to get to the target. And then sometimes they don't fire. We have to drive all the way back. It's a lot of driving. It's a lot of trying to anticipate. It's a lot of probabilities, right? Because at the end of the day, there's not a whole lot of data in the sky besides some of these soundings. So sometimes there's going to be a high probability zone that just doesn't go. Sometimes there's going to be like a 2% day, as people say, and then you have a crazy tornado. So in order to get out to the target, I don't know too much about that, but there's definitely a whole art and science to that. And then once we're actually at the target, in the past, it's been, okay, let's wait until we actually get a tornado on the ground because the drones that we're using are limited. And as you alluded to, the drones are a little expensive, and we do have some of the highest quality components that we can on there in order to actually get the most amount of performance. And so we only this year had maybe about 3 or 4 drones that were really working. And so that means we only have 3 or 4 shots in a sense. So if we're deploying on a tornado, we could use up all the drones in a day if they don't make it back. So for us, we really just want to be deploying on a tornado when it's on the ground. At this point, though, we're with hopefully with more funding, we hope to build a ton of drones. We hope to have at least 10 drones, so that way, even if there's a funnel forming, we can go out on the tornado, we can sample it, and hopefully, if it actually turns into a tornado, we can learn a lot about how the tornado forms while we're flying around it as it's forming, right? Like that is to me something that could be really valuable. So that's the goal, but for right now, we've been playing it a little bit more safe, waiting till the tornado hits the ground. That way, that we're using a drone properly, and that way, if something ever happens to it, it at least got valuable data in tornadic winds.
Couple more questions for you, and I appreciate you taking time because this is super fascinating. Are you guys just flying one drone at a time into the storm, or are you guys going to start working two, three drones? Something like
Right. So it does depend on how many drones that we have available, right? But what is really interesting is the vertical stacking approach when getting data. We've talked about this with Karen Kasiba and Josh Warman, where if we can get uh, a vertical profile as we're bisecting a tornado, where we have 2 drones stocked on top of each other and they're flying through the tornado's RMDs, the radius of maximum winds, then we could have a really interesting picture and more of like a 3D map or so of actually what's going on with the relative humidity, the thermo, the 3D wind speeds. I think that could be probably the most valuable, honestly, for some people, where if we get 3D wind measurements at different altitudes at the same on the same plane, I mean, that's just next level. So that is our end goal as well, is to get these kind of data sets with multiple drones in the tornado at the same time. Because again, if you're just getting 1 point in a tornado's lifespan, it's not going to be as valuable as getting two or even hopefully three. So, yes, we're going to try to get more drones into tornadoes in the near future, but it just depends on funding for us, if we can actually afford sending all these drones out.
I was reading on your website that you guys received FAA clearance to fly into a tornado. Talk me through that process. How did you approach the FAA, and did they just come back to you and start laughing initially when you said, "I want to fly a drone into a tornado"?
So this has never been done before with the FAA, not only just in real life with the project, but the FAA has never had this problem to tackle, approving a waiver for something like this. Because for us, we don't know where we're going to be flying. And if you can imagine everyone else getting FAA clearance, they know exactly where they're flying. They're going to be flying, over a sporting event or over, and something else, right? And for us, we could be flying, you know, over thousands of square miles of countryside. We just don't know where. And so with the FAA, we've had to waive, all of this countryside. We've had to waive the speed limit. Obviously, there's a 100-mile-an-hour speed limit from the FAA if you're operating under Part 107. There's just many other things that we're waiving here. I think we've waived at least five, different things from the FAA, and we've all kind of lumped it into one waiver. And yeah, I mean, this took a really long time. We were really working our contacts at the FAA, going through all of our connections, starting a really good dialogue. And we've had to create tens and tens of pages of documentation to be able to support our argument for why this is safe and why also that this is just necessary, but more so why it's safe, right? Because that's really what the FAA cares about. As long as it's safe, as long as, the drone is imposing more threat to life or property than the tornado itself, things should be all right. So, yeah, definitely something that we've been working through. It took a really long time, a lot of effort behind the scenes, but ended up paying off.
Where can people go get more information about the Otis project, and where can they donate to you to continue this very valuable science?
Thank you, Bobby. So, the otisproject.com is the easiest way to learn more about us. We have a little bit of information on there. I would say that our most active social media platform is Twitter or X. And so if anyone wants more of those real-time updates on what we're doing in the field, definitely check us out there. But we're on all other social media platforms. And if you do want to help out the project, feel free to click that donate button on our website. And yeah, appreciate that.